The president of an Haftar company demanded browser history reports on every employee in his own building. His personal browsing topped the list. Welcome back to Legal Verdict Daily. Today on Malicious Compliance, nobody told the IT guy to exclude management. Let us inspect the evidence. So here is how it all started. I used to work as the IT guy for an HR company. The founder and president of that company became convinced that the sales call center was wasting too much time on the internet. And here is the thing. Those were already the lowest paid people in the company. But apparently, the solution to that problem was finding reasons to pay them even less. Yeah, right. Good luck with that. So the boss is worried about the workers who earn the least money wasting time online. Yeah, right. Instead of looking at the leadership, he decides to spy on the people who actually bring in the cash. Someone tell me in the comments if you have seen this exact thing happen at your own job. Because I have a feeling this is more common than we think. And to make it look fair, he did not want to single out any one department. So he wanted browser history reporting on everyone in the company. Every manager, every employee, every executive, all of it. The managers and HR would review everything during weekly performance meetings. So I complied. I did exactly what he asked. Hold on a second. The answer to a slow call center is to monitor the internet history of the entire company. The audacity. This man demanded the browsing data of literally every person in his building. And the best part, he was putting himself right into that system without even realizing it. That little detail is about to come back to haunt him. So I wrote a scheduled task that scraped the browser history from every Windows machine on the company domain. Everything was stored centrally and fed into a management portal, right next to the employee's information. A full surveillance dashboard, built exactly the way he wanted it. And then the first reports came in. The call center employees were surprisingly boring. Oh boy. Sure, there was Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, and the occasional person doing research that was definitely not part of their job. But overall, pretty tame. So imagine the disappointment in the meeting when the bosses realized there was no big scandal hiding on the sales floor. The drama they were hunting for simply was not there. And then her started looking at everyone else. The executives, the managers, the leadership team. Because once the dashboard was live, there was no reason to stop at the call center. And that is when things got interesting. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for what the reports revealed next. The browsing history of the founder, the owner, and the president was absolutely spectacular. So much adult content. Like, this man had a sickness level. And honestly, I was not particularly surprised. I had worked on his home computer before, so I already knew about his rather enthusiastic browsing habits. But I had never expected to see them neatly categorized in the same productivity dashboard he demanded for his employees. Wait, what? That is unbelievable. So the man who demanded to see the browser history of everyone was secretly the most active browser on the payroll. The gall. And here is the kicker, he did this to himself. Nobody forced him to build that dashboard. He walked right into his own trap and sat down in the middle of it. A few days later, Hart came to me with a very polite, very nervous request. They asked if I could exclude certain people from the reports. So I asked, who? And they handed me a list. The president was at the very top. The man who ordered this entire surveillance system was the first name her wanted erased from it. Are you actually kidding me right now? So the whole system, the weekly meetings, the invasion of every employee's privacy, all of that was perfectly fine. But the moment the numbers pointed at the boss, suddenly the rules needed a little editing. The audacity. This is exactly why the phrase "rules for thee, but not for me" was invented. And here is the punchline, my friends. Funny how quickly the commitment of the company to objective productivity metrics disappeared when the metrics became objective. Her wanted the president out of the reports. But nobody ever told me to exclude management. So the system kept doing exactly what it was built to do. And the data stayed right where it was. The audacity of this person. Everyone wanted transparency until transparency showed up at the front door wearing a suit and holding a printed copy of its own browser history. Let me ask you something. What would you do if you were this it guy? Would you hand her the list and walk away? Drop your answer in the comments, because I am genuinely curious. Alright, let us look at how the community reacted. One commenter shared a wild story from their own workplace. They used to work at a senior living company, and not long after they left, the government opened an investigation into the chief financial officer over accounting problems. The government demanded the company provided laptop that he had been using. And that chief financial officer did something incredibly bold. He wiped the laptop completely and returned it, claiming he had never used it for work, and that it only contained personal stuff. So the company had to hire a forensic recovery company to dig the data back out. And what did they recover? A huge amount of adult content and some very questionable browsing activity. That guy was an arrogant jerk, and honestly, it still makes people chuckle to this day. Another user told the IT guy to keep making those reports no matter what. Even if R says stop, keep them as collateral, because you never know when you will need that evidence. And someone else shared their own version of this exact story. Their tech team was told to track who swiped into every building. They tracked everyone, including upper management, and posted the data on the intranet in the name of transparency. The tracking survived 2 days before the whole thing was canceled. And then there is the comment that sums up this entire situation. Rules for thee, but not for me. In their entire corporate career, the productivity of the most junior staff and the lowest paid teams was always the biggest stress point for the executives. They have seen it again and again, even with leadership teams they genuinely respected. If that sounds familiar to you, you are not alone. Legally speaking, this story is a goldmine. First, the big question. Can an employer legally monitor the internet use of its employees? The short answer is yes, in most places. When you use a company device on a company network, the employer generally owns that network. In the United States, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act allows employers to monitor the systems they provide as long as there is a legitimate business purpose. Second, the key to doing it lawfully is notice and transparency. Most privacy laws require the employer to tell workers they are being monitored. A clear written policy, signed by the employee. That is what keeps a monitoring program on the right side of the law. Surveillance done in secret is where the lawsuits start to grow. And third, there is the company property angle. The chief financial officer in that comment thought he could just wipe his laptop and hide his browsing. But that laptop belonged to the company. The data on it including the personal browsing, could still be recovered by experts. Wiping a device does not truly delete anything. It just makes it harder to find. And the law generally lets the employer access the data on its own equipment. And one more point worth making, the boss is also an employee. If the monitoring is truly company-wide, the data will include the executives too. That is not a mistake, that is how the system was designed. The problem was never the technology. The problem was that the president wanted to be the exception to his own rule. The exact rules vary by country and by state, so always check the law where you live. But the lesson is universal. Surveillance is legal. Surveillance of the boss is also legal. Alright, it is time for the final verdict. On the malicious compliance scale, this one earns a solid 5 out of 5. The IT guy followed every single instruction to the letter. He built exactly what he was asked to build. And the system did exactly what it was designed to do. The president simply did not like the results, but the results were never the problem. The problem was always the man who ordered the reports. And that wraps up the case for today on Legal Verdict Daily. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button and subscribe, because we break down cases like this every single week. And before you go, tell me in the comments, would you have handed her that list? Let us know. And as always, stay curious, stay kind, and stay on the right side of the law. I will see you in the next one.